A young reformer or an entrenched military man? Ethiopia has a new leader, the first from the Oromo ethnic group that's been at the forefront of anti-government protests. Can Abiy Ahmed unite a country riven by ethnic tensions? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. At 42, he'll be the youngest leader in Africa. Abiy Ahmed, the new head of Ethiopia's ruling coalition, has an impressive academic and security resume. He has a doctorate in peace and security and long-standing military and intelligence ties. But crucially, he's from Ethiopia's largest ethnic group, the Oromo. Community activists say they've been marginalized and excluded from political and economic power. It's a dispute that's led to years of violence. Many hope Ahmed's rise is an opportunity to turn the page on a difficult chapter in Ethiopian history. Fintan Monahan has more.
Leaders of Ethiopia's ruling coalition are putting their hopes in Abiy Ahmed to unite a divided country. He's from the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia, the Oromo. He's expected to become the first Oromo prime minister. Ethiopians hope he can end years of protests against ethnic discrimination.
Many things have happened and a lot of people have lost their lives. The new prime minister must communicate and listen to the people. What do the people want? This is the most important thing. He needs to pay attention to the voice of the people.
Despite being one-third of the population, the Oromo claim they've been politically and economically marginalized. Tensions exploded in 2015 when thousands took to the streets over a land dispute. They were joined by the Amara, the second largest ethnic group. Their anger was directed against the Tigrayans, an ethnic group that activists say dominates the intelligence, security and military apparatus. While the government did drop the controversial development plans, protests continued, calling for regional autonomy and greater representation. Hundreds of protesters and dozens of security forces were killed. The State Human Rights Commission recommended prosecution of some police officers, but maintained that the use of force was appropriate. Hundreds fled across the border to Kenya, fearing for their lives.
We can't leave that country because of politica. We can't participate politica in Ethiopia because the Ethiopian politics is not independent politics, and he attack us, and because of that we are crossing the border.
The Prime Minister, Hailemariam Desalegn, had characterized the protest as a threat to national security, appealing on protesters to respect the rule of law. But growing divisions in the ruling coalition led Desalegn to announce his surprise resignation last month. The government now recognizes some of the protesters' demands and is calling for dialogue aimed at lasting solutions. This paved the way for Ahmed's rise, with promises of reform and an Ethiopia united by nationality instead of divided by ethnicity. At 42 years old, Ahmed will be one of Africa's youngest leaders, but critics say he's still a creature of the establishment. Ahmed is a former military man, a lieutenant colonel in the defense forces. He also ran the Information Network Security Agency, charged with controlling the internet. It's also accused of spying on Ethiopian dissidents abroad. Ethiopia remains one of the world's fastest-growing economies. The ruling alliances claim credit for significantly reducing poverty over the past 2 decades. A world of potential if Abiy Ahmed can deliver stability and reform and heal the nation's divisions. Fintan Monahan, Al Jazeera.
Well, let's bring in our panel now from Addis Ababa, Negere Lencho, Ethiopia's communications minister. In Frankfurt, Sedali Lema, editor-in-chief of the Addis Standard. And from Washington, D.C., Mohammed Ademo, an Ethiopian journalist and founder of opride.com. That's an independent news website about the Oromo and Ethiopia. Welcome to you all. Mr. Lencho, a new leader, but is the government willing to carry out the reforms that protesters have been calling for?
Thank you so much. Yes, there is a new leader, chairperson for the ruling EPRDF, and then shortly to become the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. The ruling party has been going through different process of renewal and change. It means that it is doing all what it has been doing to respond to the grievances that the people of Ethiopia in general have been addressing. And so we can say that, yes, new leader and the administration in general is ready to respond to the needs of the people.
Mr. Ademo, how do the Oromo people feel about this new leader? Is it enough to appease them? And does he represent real change for them?
I think the most important context here is this is the only leader that could have pulled Ethiopia back from the brink, and certainly the ruling party from edging closer to what most people would say dissolution. So in that sense, I think this is the best of the alternatives that were provided for this position. But I think ultimately it comes down to, it's not so much that now we have an Oromo prime minister, which is symbolically very important, but I think what he does next and who he surrounds himself with, who is going to come into his new cabinet, because the ruling party has taken responsibility for the crisis in the country, particularly the executive leadership. We will have to wait and see what kind of change he will put in there, because if you just change one leader at the top, that necessarily doesn't mean a whole lot of change. And I think we will have to see specifics. And people are cautiously optimistic, and they are going to give him a chance. He will have to deliver.
And Ms. Lema, do you think he will deliver? Will the change trickle down from the top into the various institutions that make up the Ethiopian government?
Well, I agree with what my colleague Mohamed Ademo said in the first place, but I would add this. Dr. Abiy is inheriting a country which I would say is a deep state in every stretch of measurement. He's inheriting a country under a state of emergency, which is essentially being ruled by the army. And he comes from the region where the state of emergency, which is hard hit by the state of emergency. And given all this, and if the reform or if the replacement of Dr. Abiy, of the outgoing prime minister by Dr. Abiy, is not going to be accompanied by the immediate lifting of the state of emergency, it is not going to give him the leverage that he needs to flex to exercise his leadership capacity, no matter how many people would surround him. The first and foremost thing would be for the state to have lifted the state of emergency so that he can have the room to maneuver, to discuss with opposition politicians, with civil society, which are prohibited under the state of emergency. So I don't see how he's going to succeed in inheriting a state under the rule of the military.
Well, let me put that to the government spokesperson. Mr. Lencho, when will the government lift the state of emergency? And will the military, the intelligence community that holds so much power in Ethiopia, are they going to work with the new prime minister?
First of all, I think we have to acknowledge that what should rule in Ethiopia or what should prevail should be democracy. And all the challenges that we have been facing can be addressed properly when democracy prevails. And concerning the state of emergency and the role of the military, actually the military is the Ethiopian military, and they are given the power and the right to the limit of the law, and it is not by a personal willingness, or it is not preference, it is not a choice to accept and work with the new leader, but the constitution forces all the institutions, including the military, to work for the people of Ethiopia, because the decision made, the new chairperson of EPRDF and then the new prime minister has been elected democratically. It means that we are building democracy in a nation, just getting rid of poverty. And there is no other choice, but it is an obligation for all institutions, including the military, to work with a new leader. And we have hope. We are highly optimistic that the needs of the Ethiopian people will be served and justice will be made. And the ruling party trusts in its leader while electing Dr. Abiy Ahmed to lead the ruling party and then to become the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. It means that by the participation of all Ethiopians across the country and also all government institutions, there is a high possibility for the new leader to respond to the needs of the Ethiopian people.
Mr. Lencho, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yes, so regarding that state of emergency, when can we expect that to be lifted, and will it come with protesters' demands being met? You know, accountability for human rights abuses, the release of political prisoners, political freedoms, greater reforms?
Well, the state of emergency is not in the best interest of the Ethiopian government, our government, and the Ethiopian people. But, we have been forced because of different factors. And the state of emergency is there to serve the interest of the Ethiopian people. But in due process, people have been voicing concerns basically from the Oromia region and other regions. And the grievances are well taken, and it will be addressed properly because the government has the obligation to protect human rights and also to serve the very interest of the people. And so regarding when the state of emergency will be lifted, from the very beginning, I have rightly said that it is not in our best interest as a government and as a people, but there are issues to be addressed. That is, there has to be peace and stability. We have to restore peace and stability. And then we have to pay attention to the questions that our people have been raising, because the government has been, for so many times, I can say for about more than 2 years, just paying attention to restoring peace and order. That can affect the economy. Now peace is a necessity. It is not an alternative for Ethiopia as a whole and for the government as well.
Ms. Lema,
it is at the hands of the Ethiopian people. We know that we cannot safeguard the peace and stability by security forces, but by the participation of all Ethiopians. And it is at the hands of the Ethiopian people. And I cannot tell you it will be lifted in a month or so, but we hope and we wish that the reality on the ground improves and we immediately lift the state of emergency.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Lencho. I'm going to bring Ms. Lema. I will bring Ms. Lema in now. Mr. Lencho is very optimistic about this situation and having peace and security. Are you as optimistic that everyone in the government is going to work together, including the Tigrayans, who've had a disproportionate amount of power for the size, for how much of the Ethiopian population they make up? Are they going to be willing now to surrender some of their power so that the political system is more equal?
Well, it's one thing to be optimistic, but it's quite another thing for me to besides being optimistic, if you look at how his election process in itself, there is enough reasons to worry about the fight that was put up, particularly from the TPLF, the Tigrayan People Liberation Front representatives, inside the council's meeting, a fight that lasted to the bitter end. He was fought against. He's even including his own candidacy was in the council there. So there's a huge resistance from particularly the representatives of the Tigrayan People Liberation Front. So that gives me enough reason to worry. But am I optimistic? I do hope, and I am optimistic regarding the coming of Dr. Abiy for one reason only, and that is he is a result of people's power. He comes from the region where the people have pushed and cornered the regional state to change its own way of conducting its business. So he is coming from that background, and he knows what it means not to deliver, and he is well aware, to my understanding, that if he fails, what he's going to be facing is going to be the people's power. That gives me hope. And he also showed a bit of an attitude previously that has a departure from the remaining government in terms of listening to the people and in terms of connecting to the people's cry, to the people's grievances. So that gives me a hope. But I still remain, cautiously optimistic about this whole process because unlike what Dr. Nagari said, with all due respect to what he said, it is not going to be an easy thing. And I'm not sure if he will be allowed to bring in the changes that he desires to, given the status quo continues like it is today.
Mr. Ademo, Ms. Lema touched on some real reform credentials that Mr. Ahmed does have. He was a very important part of the Oromia state government that was driving reform in that region, including things like the way police conducted themselves during protests. He allowed the regional broadcaster to have more press freedom. Do you think that he will be able to carry out those reforms on a national level? How difficult is that going to be?
I think it's important. I'm glad that you point that out because when he was elected at Oromia as a vice president, it was at the height of Oromo protests. His election itself was a response to relentless protests. And I think aside from changing the way the regional broadcaster, the board of which Dr. Abiy chairs, and then also changing the police and society relations, I think one of the things that they did successfully at the regional level was acknowledging that there are problems. And the best way to deal with those problems is by listening to people, by cleaning up their house. That entails laying off a lot of people, corrupt officials, TPLF cronies who were holding office as gatekeepers in real reform, in embracing the protesters' demands. And the question now is whether he will be able to take that to the national level. And I think he has a historic opportunity to do that. And there are various factors I can cite. One is the regional party from Oromia, Opidio, controls the majority of seats in parliament. And the parliament, the Ethiopian parliament, has been a rubber stamp legislature for the last 27 years. But over the last year, we have seen some movement where at least some of the members are now voting their conscience and listening to the will of the people, listening to their constituents. So the most logical thing to do for Dr. Abiy and for his party now is use that power, use that leverage, lift the state of emergency, which essentially takes away his civilian powers and give the powers to the military. I agree with Dr. Lencho that what Ethiopia needs now is real democracy and more freedoms. But the way to deal with that is not by doubling down with the same tired and tried and failed strategies of a state of emergency, more repression, putting people who were arrested a month ago back in jail. Yeah. This kind of back and forth, one step forward, one step back, that is not going to inspire confidence, and that is not going to restore the credibility, the legitimacy that this government lacks.
And let me put that to Mr. Lencho then. Mr. Lencho, are the hardliners, the elites in the government, ready to believe that security crackdowns can no longer crush dissent?
Well, thank you. Actually, Dr. Abiy Ahmed is a gift to the Ethiopian people, and it has come a long way through this different process that EPRDF followed as a party. It means he has been democratically elected because he's a visionary, because he is an architect of change. It is a hope to the Ethiopian people in general, and basically the youth in particular, who have been voicing different grievances. In that case, we have to understand that without promoting democracy and ensuring equality, justice, rule of law in general, I don't think that we can solve the problems that we are facing these days. Therefore, there is no party which has a special treatment, special privilege in Ethiopia, because all Ethiopian people, we can say, have paid sacrifices to build this nation.
But Mr. Lencho, the reason we have, isn't the reason why there is a new leader in Ethiopia because of mass protests over many years, because one party, one tribe are seen to have had too much power, disproportionate power?
Well, now I am talking about the reality. You know, people may see things from different perspectives. I don't buy even the idea that one party is a kingmaker and can make and break. We won't accept this in the future if we have to change Ethiopia for the right cause.
All right, Mr. Lencho.
In that case, we have to change our perspective as well so that we can change the reality.
All right, Mr. Lencho.
I understand you. We don't deny that. There are rent seekers in the party, and
I'm just going to bring Mr. Ademo in now because we don't have very long left, and I'd like to see, and I see that he has something to say.
Absolutely. I think we should be very clear that the ruling party, EPRDF, in January acknowledged that TPLF, the kingmakers in the EPRDF coalition, have built cronies inside OPDO, inside other parties, which essentially made the country ungovernable. They continue to have that power. They still control the military. They still control the intelligence. They are heavily invested in the economic sector. Their companies associated with them control the commanding heights of the country's economy. So I don't think the prime minister will have power, or his term will be much different from that of the outgoing prime minister if we are going to repeat that. So I think EPRDF understands there is a problem. Now, they have to see to it that the solution is what the communications minister, Dr. Nagari, is saying. More democracy, more freedom, opening up the political environment. EPRDF cannot solve the problems alone. The opposition needs to be brought in and be part of the solution. That includes opposition in the country, opposition outside the country.
All right, Mr. Ademo.
Freedom of the press. The civil society doesn't exist.
All the things that protesters have been calling for. I'm going to bring Ms. Lema in now because we don't have a very long left. I'm going to give her the last point. Is Mr. Ahmed going to be able to bridge the divisions in the coalition and succeed?
That again still depends on what the party is going to do to every initiative that he may probably bring to the table. Let's not forget that EPRDF as a coalition is a party and a governing party that considers compromise as a sign of weakness. What kind of compromise are they going to make in order to bring about the changes? In December, when the leaders of all the four parties met together, they have brought around 12 major agendas that they said needed a reform. And the most important ones are the security reform in the security sector and the army, judiciary, and the economy itself and all. And they have agreed that they need to bring the reform agenda, and they have set up a committee for each of the reform agenda that they brought together. They acknowledge that unless they have brought a change into those areas, they face an imminent threat of collapse. So they all understand that, but that means they need to make a lot of compromise. And EPRDF, as a party, is a party that's led by a groupthink, a party that thinks compromise is a sign of weakness, and that's the worry right now. So no matter how much effort Dr. Abiy is going to bring in, unless the party gives him the leverage in the room to maneuver, he's going to be a spectacular failure again.
All right, Mr. Lema, thank you very much for that. That is Sadale Lema joining us from Frankfurt. We have Nagari Lencho in Addis Ababa and Mohammed Ademo in Washington, D.C. Thank you all very much for your time today. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the whole team here, thank you very much for watching, and bye for now.